Good morning. Very good morning to everyone. Could you please find your seat? Thank you so much. Before we open today's business, I just want to make a small change to the agenda of today. You may recall there are two homework overnight from yesterday. One is that the proposed change to the policy on monitoring. Another important item is in how to handle this proposal from yesterday's work program about the transparency of the selection of lead agency and countries. And on those two things, we would like to discuss this afternoon after relation with conventions and approval of MOU on Minamata, and before any other business. So that an agenda item between 14-15 and that an agenda item 18, we need to create some access space to discuss those two leftover homework from yesterday. So please be mindful about it. So with that, I would like to ask that Carola to kick off today's agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Naoko, and welcome everyone back to the second day of our formal meeting this semester. This morning we will start off with a number of agenda points on evaluation. The first one is the semi-annual evaluation report and management response, for which I'll give the floor first to Juha and then to Naoko. Juha will present the evaluations performed, after which Naoko will present the management response. So without further ado, Juha, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. So we have the semi-annual evaluation report as the first agenda item, and as you know, this is actually the main document that summarizes all of the evaluations that we have conducted, which include the annual performance report, which has a specific focus on sustainable transport. We did another value for money analysis, and this time in the sustainable forest management field, and then we did a study on the scaling up in the GEF, and I'll go through these briefly, or actually I don't go through all of them because we are responsive, and I have heard the comments where people say that my droning on can be quite tiring to hear. So I will have my Chief Evaluation Officer Geeta to talk through some of these evaluations, and then we'll go through what else, other stuff. But these three evaluations are the most important ones. So as we always do in every June Council meeting, also known as the spring meeting, although it's rather summery, we present the annual performance report on the overall performance of the GEF. As we know, this is based on the terminal evaluations of projects. We have analyzed all of the projects in a time series way, and looking at what the project evaluations say about their successes. There are no surprises this year either, and there has been a discussion earlier whether we even need to present this every year, because there seldom are particular surprises. But I just wanted to remind us so that these are, because there was yesterday some discussion again about the fact that results take a fairly long time to materialize. And the GEF Secretariat mentioned the fact that to reach the outcomes takes quite some time. We discussed the question whether we can actually see some results at the midterm reviews. Depends, I would say. Most often with new projects, for example, you will not see very much happening on the ground. So our evaluation, if you remember, some time ago we presented an evaluation of the land degradation portfolio, which showed that it usually takes about 4 to 5 years after the project closing before you can actually see results on the ground. Our value for money study on sustainable forest management again confirms this. So therefore, you cannot expect to you have evaluative evidence of new of findings of environmental impacts very soon at any time. The same goes for the impact programs. In the GEF 6, 3 integrated approach pilots were initiated, but we still don't know. Actually, we can evaluate what happens in the process and so forth, but we cannot actually say what are the final environmental impacts as yet. Okay, so we have been just putting forward these slides here, and they basically show that the performance of the GEF on a portfolio level tends to be fairly stable, and there is always some progress in issues such as the monitoring and evaluation, which is getting better both in terms of design and also in implementation. So maybe to the more interesting part, which is our deep dive on the sustainable transport, which has been a fairly significant area in the GEF, with $500 million in GEF funds invested over the years into sustainable transport projects, basically in the climate change focal area. This is something that we have never looked into in a systematic manner, so we decided that this year we would do an analysis of it. And using against the usual criteria that are accepted in evaluation of relevance, effectiveness, efficiency, and sustainability, I have to comment on STAP's use of the word durability, which is I see the rationale for that, because there is big distinction between environmental sustainability and, as we understand, sustainable development and project sustainability. However, we have decided to stick with the more traditional sustainability definition, basically because it is so widely accepted and through the OECD DAC practice also. But so getting back to this presentation, actually, so we can see that the transportation portfolio has been quite relevant in terms of the fact that it is mostly an urban transport focus here, and if you compare just what is the share of urban population by region and the GEF transport portfolio, you can see that there is a very close correlation. And again, here has been a shift towards more integrated approaches that has to do with land use planning and transport-oriented development and so forth. Performance-wise, the outcomes and the sustainability of these projects corresponds pretty well with what the overall performance in the GEF has been. We have to just say that that the direct avoided greenhouse gas emissions from these projects has been significantly lower than projected at the project design. And this is irrespective of, we can discuss the methodology, but it's irrespective of that. So the direct GHG abatements have been lower. The outcomes have been pretty good. The program has transformed markets in many countries, and in especially in middle-income countries such as China, Malaysia, and others. It has contributed to establishing bus rapid transit systems in cities in many countries, and promoted non-motorized transit, and overall transit-oriented development in cities. The conclusion here really is the fact that GEF has done really well in places where the program has aligned with the vision of the local governments and the national governments. So in cities where there has been demand for this type of investment, things have gone really pretty well. And so how does the GEF how has GEF added value to these sustainable transport projects? And it has been through various mechanisms, including increasing the scale in terms of the numbers of countries that participate and so forth. It has increased the viability of projects, and speeding up implementation. You know, things that might have happened anyway, but happen much faster now through GEF. Again, one of the most important things, and you'll see that these numbers don't add up to 100% because there's a significant overlap between the categories. So several projects have done all of this. But the mainstreaming of these low carbon approaches has been very important, and it has taken the form of helping the cities to plan their activities better and to build capacities to identify and implement low carbon approaches. In such cases, the GEF projects have been built around capital-intensive baseline projects, and much of the work has been related to transit-oriented development, land use planning. How do you city planning in general? So this is very important here. Again, as often our evaluations find out that GEF's comparative advantage is really in working with legal, policy, and regulatory measures and capacity development in these cities. So, what do we actually recommend here? Is basically just two simple things. One is that one should design the M&E systems and particularly the methodologies to assess the greenhouse gas emissions abatement and other factors such as process and behavioral change, policy reform indicators, and so forth, according to the project design, and to track specifically what the incremental benefits of the GEF support has been. So that's better to understand, better to follow up what is going on with these projects. And the other is that, you know, I said earlier, just 1 minute ago, that the GEF's comparative advantage and where it has actually achieved results has been in when it has worked on capacity development, urban and transport planning, and policy and regulatory development. So we feel that evidence shows that this is where GEF's comparative advantage has been and should be in the future also. And we say that GEF should restrict support for civil works to pilot and demonstration activities. It doesn't mean that it should stop doing it. Sometimes you have to do these things, and sometimes they are very useful, and they will lead to broader adoption, and they, you know, when you demonstrate something and so forth. But it might not be the #1 priority for GEF. And now I'll pass on to, you know, somebody was saying earlier that, you know, from baritone to tenor, so this will be Gita.
Thank you, Juha. Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. The second evaluation that we've completed for this reporting period is the value for money analysis of GEF interventions in support of sustainable forest management. If you may recall, as part of OPS 6, we did the value for money analysis for land degradation and biodiversity projects, and the Council had requested us to expand this analysis to other areas as well. This exercise builds on the previous satellite-based approach, and we expand it to actually include the socio-economic co-benefits of GEF interventions, and this has not been done before. So this is a pilot even for our office. This is the geographical distribution of GEF SFM projects. For this analysis, we included 347 projects for which we had precise geographic location, and this was not available in all, so we could not include the entire portfolio. And the other is for projects that were at least in implementation by 2013. This is not to baffle you with, you know, the extent of the methodology, but just to say we had 3 objectives in this exercise. One was to find out the impact of GEF interventions at the portfolio scale on land cover and above ground carbon storage. 2 is to estimate the amount of carbon sequestered and is giving it a monetary value. And 3rd is in terms of capturing socioeconomic co-benefits. We had a multi-step, multi-pronged approach. The first was to determine the precise geolocation of these of the projects. The second is to get satellite data so we could get time trends on the variables that we were interested in, like forest cover, deforestation trends. The third is we integrated this satellite data with socioeconomic data such as night lights. Night lights is predominantly being used these days by a number of agencies to capture poverty. We also used a lot of data on precipitation, temperature, slope. Then we did causal trees and machine learning. It's not that this is just the in thing, but it applies very well in this context to understand the factors that influence some of these outcomes so that we could actually get a handle on what were the most important factors that affected GEF performance in these projects. And finally, we did an estimation of the carbon sequestered. And this was based on a very moderate carbon value, and we used a value transfer approach. I could say that this was a novel approach that we tested for the first time, where we actually superimposed survey data captured by the World Bank through its household surveys. We used portfolio analysis as well as did a country case study on Uganda. The key findings from this analysis, one is most GEF implementation sites are in sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, and in the Caribbean. Madagascar, Colombia, and Brazil are the 3 countries with the largest number of project locations. And there was a limited investment in drylands until GEF 6, so the new impact programs on drylands is a clear step in a very good direction. The upper panel shows that GEF SFM projects were implemented in geographic locations with very high initial conditions of deforestation. And this points to the high relevance of these interventions. They were more focused on environmental degradation, and rightfully so, as compared with socio-economic conditions, because when we looked at the distribution of night lights, the light intensity was pretty low across all GEF locations. What are some of the key findings that we've observed? The most important one being the areas with GEF SFM interventions have approximately 0.27% less deforestation each year compared with similar areas without GEF interventions. This is not a small number when you look at the land scale. Combined with improvements in vegetation density, this cohort contributed an additional sequestered above ground carbon of 1.33 tons per hectare per year, worth about $730,000 approximately annually on average, based on a very conservative valuation of carbon, compared with those locations that did not have GEF interventions. So we used a quasi-experimental approach to actually compare GEF-assisted areas with non-GEF-assisted areas. What does it boil down to in terms of the return on investment? For every dollar invested by GEF, it was a 17-cent return, little higher than what we observed in the case of land degradation and biodiversity, which was about 8 to 10 cents. It's also because partly can be explained by the fact that these had very high initial deforestation rates. In terms of socioeconomic co-benefits, at the portfolio level, we find a very small positive impact of GEF interventions, but this is proxied by nighttime lights, and satellites do not capture nighttime lights very easily in areas with low light conditions. However, we coupled this data with the LSMS household survey that's carried out by the World Bank and deep dived into a case study on Uganda that was also carried out by the bank. And we found that GEF SFM projects are associated with an increase in household assets of about $310 in locations that are close to GEF interventions. So this was clearly a positive impact on household assets. What are some of the factors that have affected the outcomes of GEF interventions? GEF projects have had a positive impact on vegetation density, particularly in lower temperature areas. In areas with high temperatures, the outcomes were less successful. In terms of avoiding deforestation, GEF projects have done very well in low population density and low urbanization areas. And finally, in terms of carbon sequestration, high initial tree cover had a positive impact on outcomes. So what do we propose for going forward? In terms of recommendations, we've said this before, we want to reiterate the importance of improving geographic precision in recording and reporting. It really helps in monitoring information. And the portal has taken this forward. It's a step in the right direction. Capturing socioeconomic co-benefits of interventions, we've demonstrated how you could actually apply this methodology and capture these socioeconomic co-benefits and analyze the trade-offs. And finally, select programs or projects like was done in the Uganda case, because it really helps to conclusively link outcomes to GEF interventions.
Thank you. Hey, we have our own little creature here on the screen. We can't compare with the peacock spider, but this is a nice little frog that my colleague Janine captured only on camera in Costa Rica in one of the World Bank implemented projects. And this is actually within an indigenous territory in the country. Okay, so I'm moving to this scaling up study here now. And I just want to put it into context that we are in the IEO, we are trying to find a balance between evaluation for accountability and to actually to see whether the GEF has been achieving its results, and learning and looking into different factors through which the GEF has been achieving impact. So as part of OPS 6, we started by providing you an analysis of transformational change and looking particularly at projects that have achieved transformational change and what are the common factors with them. Then last year we presented you a study of the sustainability, and now we have been looking at scaling up, and we have actually a plan to actually then to have a next study on innovation. So why are we interested in scaling up? Maybe that's a silly question, because we have been talking yesterday a lot about scaling up and how do GEF projects take to the scale. The question often is is GEF only giving out money to do something, and and then it's gone, and then that's it, or is it leading to something larger, that the catalytic approach, catalytic impact of the GEF leads to scaling up? So the scaling up is also a fundamental issue in the GEF 2020 strategy, which is actually, 2020 is next year, but it's still our strategy here. It is part of the GEF 7 programming directions, and it is an essential aspect of the impact programs. That's one way of achieving scale. So the GEF has been shifting towards projects that focus on impact at scale, and the IEO has used this as an indicator of progress towards impact. But then how that happens has never been very systematically looked at. So the purpose of this evaluation was to examine the past experiences of the GEF and the agencies in their own capacity, and other sectors that we can draw lessons that can be used in designing and implementing future interventions. We know that the GEF has been successful in supporting scaling up on many occasions, but how can it do more systematically? So there's a learning objective here. We also know that the GEF has been successful in scaling up through various processes. STAP, again, said yesterday, Rosina said that, that you don't need necessarily, you don't need large interventions that would guarantee transformational change or scaling up. Sometimes, we have examples in this evaluation also of investments of different sizes that have achieved scaling up. So again, what did we do? We looked at the entire GEF portfolio, but unfortunately scaling up has not been defined or tracked within the partnership very systematically, so we couldn't identify how many projects actually intended to scale up. So instead, again, we conducted interviews with the GEF Secretariat from the outset of this evaluation, GEF management, implementing agencies, and so forth. And we also did a survey, and we reviewed terminal evaluation reports to solicit cases where scaling up was definitely successful or definitely unsuccessful. From these cases, we assessed in greater depth 20 of the successful cases where we could obtain both quantitative outcomes and assess the factors and conditions that led to these outcomes. Based on the literature and the interviews with the GEF Secretariat and the agencies, as well as project reviews, we define scaling up in two parts. One is to increase the magnitude of the global environmental benefits or the expansion in the geographical area or sectors where the global environmental benefits are generated. And we emphasize that scaling up is a continuous process. It's not something that you did it today and it's done. It continues. It's a process. And like we said, the integrated approaches and so on, it is important. Everybody agrees with that. But again, it's not the size of the initial GEF investment that this seems to be a fundamental issue here. So in our analysis, the successful cases often involved more than one project and received GEF support for more than 5 years. So again, the time factor is there. You have to stay with it. And sometimes these were really, really long periods. So, investments that have been spanning the whole life of the GEF of a quarter century. But in some cases, especially again in the climate change mitigation focal area, the GEF support was only provided through one project, and then which led into scaling up of that approach if the technology was appropriate and the project demonstrated that it was viable, and the scaling up could happen through both the government and the private sector. Again, at the risk of repeating myself, the successful projects that we looked into and successful cases range from less than 1 million in the GEF support to some of the projects that were, or interventions that were more than 100 million. And it was they were delivered through various modalities, including enabling activities and the small grants program. We found that the GEF has been good at supporting pilots that demonstrate positive benefits. It has also been good at establishing the enabling conditions for scaling up. And these two things are such that tend to attract support from other institutions, including the governments, private sector, CSOs, and other donors as well. The GEF has benefited from partnering with different partners in this area. So this is one of our key findings here, that you'll see that the GEF has been really supporting scaling up through knowledge and information initiatives, as well as incentives that have helped to motivate multiple groups of stakeholders at different levels. And it has supported a lot of capacity building at the institutional and individual levels that has helped sustain support for scaling up activities. And so one of the important things has been really to choosing to work with the right influencers and institutions, and leveraging the right conditions at the right time you know, when you are in the right place at the right time, working with the right people, so then you actually lead to, you actually achieve scale. We delved into a number of cases to find out just how sustainable GEF's contributions to scaling up have been and so on. We visited 3 countries as far as we could tell, the GEF is no longer funding particular interventions, so we could see what happened afterwards. And for example, these projects in Costa Rica and Macedonia are good examples. In the Costa Rica case, we supported existing government agency that was running the country's payment for ecosystem services program and provided funding to this biodiversity trust fund, and this has continued, and GEF is no longer involved, and this is 100% funded by the government. In Macedonia, in the PCB, in the chemicals and waste area, there was a lot of emphasis on technology and training, and the private sector took it over. So here is actually an IEO presentation nowadays would not be complete without a little video.
So one of the problems we had was the octopus Rodrigues, which is an important thing for the people. Lots of people were earning a living out of it, and it's in the dish is very important. People like it. Tourists come for that. We used to fish about 800 tons a year. In 2012, we found that it was going to extinction, 100 tons a year. And also we were not fishing, the fishermen were just fishing these octopus that had not reached maturity, so they couldn't reproduce. So we were killing this industry based on lots of studies done by Scholz and the GEF, of course, funded by GEF. And we found that we had to close this fishery. So after 7 years of closure, we have reached about 700 tons. So we are just close to back to where we started, and people are very happy. And we're giving jobs to the fishermen when the octopus closure, the octopus fishery is closed. Lots of people have copied the octopus fishery. Tanzania, Zanzibar, they have come to visit us to see it. Mauritius is doing the same thing. So I think we are, as in Rodrigues, we are giving the good example about the protection of the environment.
Okay, so you heard it from the horse's mouth, and so to say, that here is an SGP project that has actually been leading into not only a broader reduction in the country of Mauritius, but in neighboring countries as well. So we have a slightly modified recommendation since yesterday, and this is slightly different from what you had in your documentation. But basically, the recommendation says that the partnership should ensure that factors influencing scaling up are identified and taken into account as appropriate in project design and implementation, and their impact assessed at midterm and terminal evaluation. So there is a question for clear articulation of how the project or the program will achieve or contribute to scaling up. In the PIF documents, actually, there is a question about this. How does the agency foresee that the project would be leading to scaling up? And we also think that the projects or programs should have common indicators to facilitate aggregation. I'll hand it over to Gita, that's our presentation on the current, on what we have completed by now.
So what's coming next? We're currently working on 3 strategic country cluster evaluations: the African biomes, the least developed countries, and the small island developing states. These are currently in progress, and we plan on presenting them in the fall of this year. And for spring 2020, looking at the evaluation of GEF's engagement in fragile and conflict-affected situations, GEF's support to sustainable forest management. I just presented the first phase of value for money today, but we have a bigger one also covering a little bit on REDD+, and evaluation of GEF's medium-sized projects, and GEF's support for innovation, findings and lessons from GEF interventions along the lines of the scaling up and the transformational change study. We continue to push the frontiers on evaluation methods in environmental evaluation, and the credit goes on behalf of Yuha and I. We'd like to recognize the evaluation team. The IEO is here in full presence for actually pushing the methodologies ahead. In terms of knowledge management, we continue to share evaluative lessons. We've particularly been focusing on sustainability in the context of the ECWs, the extended constituency workshops, and we've also been gathering field feedback on what sustainability means for operations in country. Knowledge sharing continues. We are a member of the Evaluation Cooperation Group of the Multilaterals, as well as the UNEG partnership. There's a lot of workshops and sharing, and most of them look at us for sharing results as well as methods on environmental evaluation. And finally, we have a big conference coming up. It's going to be the 3rd one in the series, the 3rd International Conference on Evaluating Environment and Development. For more information, please visit the Earth Eval platform. It's a live running. We've got over 70 people already submitted abstracts, so there's been a lot of interest in it. There were 2 books that were published from the 2 earlier conferences, and we expect the same. And we'll keep you informed as this develops further. On the management action record, we've had complete agreement with management on the adoption of the recommendations. They were rated as substantial on the CSO network, the engagement with indigenous peoples, the APR 2015, LDCF, SECF, and the minimum standards on environmental and social safeguards. There's been a lot of progress made on these policies as reported. One area that was rated as medium adoption and will be retained on the books is on the SGP graduation policy, and this was rated as medium by both management as well as IEO.
Okay, the final part. You will remember that in December, I presented to the Council 2 options for doing a peer review of the evaluation office. And the first option was that it would be a council-managed external review, and the second option was that we would manage it, but it would be still an independent review of our office. And the latter was the preferred option that the council decision reflected. So just to remind ourselves that why do we do so there's always this question of who evaluates the evaluators. So there are some other evaluators who evaluate the evaluators at this stage, and the purpose is really to really see whether the IEO itself is performing its functions in an optimal and ideal manner, and to enhance its impact and strengthen its role as an independent evaluator. I will want to recall the fact that when I joined this office in September 2014, there had been a previous peer review that was completed just, I think, in May of that same year, And it was extremely helpful for me. I had, of course, some ideas, and I had seen the GEF and I had seen the IEO from the outside. But when I read that peer review, and I said, things started clicking. Yeah, that's how it is, indeed. And it was extremely helpful for us to move on words with this. So again, we have combined, when we wrote the terms of reference of the peer review, we took elements from both the reviews that the ECG, the Evaluation Cooperation Group of the banks, does, the UN Evaluation Group peer reviews, as well as the OECD DAC Evaluation Network peer reviews. So we focus on the review will focus on the independence, the relevance of the IEO, its roles and contributions, the evaluation policy actually that we will present today, but with the caveat that if the peer review finds that it's lacking, so we may want to revisit it. And whether we are efficient and effective in the way we do things. So we managed to put together an, I would say, incredibly high-powered and highly qualified panel. We have Saras Menon as the independent chair. She used to she was the longest-serving chair of the UN Evaluation Group and headed the UNDP Evaluation Office for I think 8 years, and was in charge of establishing how the independent evaluation in UNDP works and what the evaluation policy is and so forth. We have 2 directors from evaluation offices. We have Mike Spilsbury from UNEP and Marvin Taylor-Dormond, who is the Director General of Asian Development Bank's evaluation. Mike is also a key person in the UN Evaluation Group, and Marvin has just relinquished his position as the chair of the ECG. So you get both of these perspectives there also. And then we have Tulia Ayatsi, who is lead advisor to the panel and has a really solid record as an evaluator herself. We are going to meet with the team for the first time. We have been feeding them information. We are not in charge, of course. They are in charge. We are the evaluand, but they have been telling us what kind of information they want, and we've been feeding this information to them. And now, next week, actually, we are going to meet for the first time with the panel, and the plan is, the timeline is here, but the bottom line is that a year from now, in the June 2020 spring meeting, you will receive the unedited, unmitigated report of that review, and I'm sure it's going to be very useful. Thanks very much. That's all for now.
Thank you very much to both of you for a very insightful presentation. I'd now like to give the floor to Naoko to present the management response to the evaluations.
Thank you, Carola. We, the GEF Secretariat, welcome IO's report on sustainable transport. We also welcome overall conclusion of sustainable forest management. You may have seen that in our management response that originally we had a reservation of that the recommendation of the scaling up study. But we, as presented by Yuha, that we were very pleased to see that the revised paper has a slightly adjusted recommendation. We found this recommendation is quite useful to ask the articulate the pathway for higher impacts at the project level, and whenever it is appropriate. I think it's workable and it's implementable. It's useful for the GEF to achieve the higher impact. So I would think that we could actually implement that conclusion or recommendation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Naoko, for a very brief summary. I would like to now open the floor to all council members to share their views, comments and questions. Please. I see Elizabeth raising her plate. Please, Elizabeth.
Good morning. We'll just jump right in. Thank you for this. I think that we really, first of all, we really appreciate the presentation. We really value IEO's work. We see this as an extremely important part of our work in deciding how the GEF can be more effective, how it can improve its work. So, I think that overall, we really look forward to this discussion every year to make sure that we are in line with what our expectations are. I think we have some questions on process. Overall, as I say, we were really looking forward to diving into this discussion today and trying to figure out what the differences were in IEO's views of its work versus management's response. And then new decision text appeared online overnight. And so I think we'd like a little bit of clarity on sort of how that came to be. It was not entirely clear to us why management pushed back so forcefully, and what it is about the scaling up decision that was so problematic. So I think a little bit more information on that would be quite useful. And we just would also like to better understand from IEO's perspective what it is that they were trying to achieve that is now different. Because it is a weakened recommendation. It is not the sort of overarching scaling up metrics that we had hoped we could look for. So that's sort of the overarching comments that we wanted to make. In more specifics, we're happy with the other recommendations. We think that it's very appropriate on the sustainable transport, that the recommendation zeroed in on where GEF's value add is, and that using grant resources for higher income countries in the transport sector may not be the best use of its resources. So absolutely, that's something that we think is an appropriate sort of focus. And then on the value for money, we note the conclusions in that analysis and appreciate the results and effectiveness that demonstrate a significant benefit to avoided deforestation as a consequence of GEF activities. We support IEO's finding that improved geographic precision in project location, including intervention boundaries, is a sensible complement to the existing GEF 7 results architecture. And we don't see this as an expansion of GEF's mandate, but we see the benefit of getting co-benefit information. On the third recommendation, we actually want to hear from our peers and the recipient governments of how they see this and if they are comfortable using these data in project design. So we might just leave it here for now. Thanks.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Those were very clear questions that we will anticipate answers to, but first to Adriana, please.
Agradecemos mucho la presentación.
Thank you very much for the presentation by the IEO, the results, the conclusions that we see in the report. As a group, we want to request that, given the importance of encouraging the contribution of countries, the Brazil Colombia-Ecuador constituencies urges the GEF Secretariat through the IEO as of the next report to include an analysis of the individual contribution of the countries through the core indicators. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next is Rachna from Mauritius.
Thank you, Chair. I was very happy to see my country case study being projected. I have two comments. First, on recommendation number 2 on the transport one. You say that GEF should restrict support for civil works for pilot projects. While I agree to your definition of the word restrict, doesn't mean stopping, but I fear that on the ground when we are going to implement, we'll face hurdles when we want to do pilot projects. And when you presented the scaling up, you showed how much pilot projects help in scaling up activities. And GEF set 7 programming, the e-mobility program forms a very important part of the programming. And in such programs, we are developing it, pilot projects are really very important. So maybe if you could amend the recommendation, instead of saying it should restrict, maybe we can say should be justified, like that for all projects where pilot projects, they are justified, they can be included in the implementation. And second comment that I have is on the scaling up recommendation number 2. While it is true that yes, we do at design level take into account scaling up, your recommendation number 2 mentions that the indicators should be common indicators with that of other designs going on. But the word common means the same indicators. In our country, we are doing some scaling up, but it's not necessarily funded by government, but other donors like Agence Française de Développement, Adaptation Fund Board, Green Climate Fund, which comes in for the scaling up. So while I do have the core indicators for GF, I don't have it in mind, the core indicators of GCF, Adaptation Fund Board. So maybe we can say instead of common indicators, relevant indicators or corresponding indicators, just to ensure that while, for example, if I take a marine protected area, we can do scaling up activities on coral restoration funded by Adaptation Fund Board, but they work together, but they might not be the same common indicators, but they are relevant indicators. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachna. I'd now like to pass the floor to the CSO representatives.
Very good morning, and I want to sincerely thank the IEO office for this very, very good document that included most of the recommendations we made yesterday. Thank you so much. Under the main updates of the GEF evaluation policy, so we want to propose one more term to add. It talks about introducing a requirement to collect socioeconomic co-benefits data, sex disaggregated and gender sensitive data. We want to propose here to add the baseline data, because if we want to quantify the real benefit or progress, then we should have the baseline. If we have this sex disaggregated baseline and economic baseline, then we can understand what is the result at the end of the project. And then second is under evaluation in the GEF, under 3A, it gives very nicely the promote accountability issues. So we want to propose to add promote defined roles and responsibility of stakeholders. That means government, agencies, civil societies, direct beneficiaries, and then bring them for accountable. before we give the defined roles and responsibilities, it will be a little bit challenging to bring them for accountability. And then next, under the part 3, roles and responsibilities, it gives very good, under the figure 2, gives monitoring and evaluation, and then the levels and responsible agencies in the GEF system. And also table A shows the roles and responsibilities, but it need to be a little bit more clarified, what, who is doing and when. Thanks for that. In addition, we would propose to include the outputs of the outputs evaluation of the thematic areas. As for example, the council has itself becoming an innovation. Like this council meeting, we have plastic pollution issue, and that helped the world, not only us, the world to think in advance at least 6 months, how to prepare, how to work, how to react, how to respond to the pollution caused by plastic. And this will be continuing in the next council meeting in another agenda. And last first day in the consultation with the CEO, we also proposed few other topics, as for example, land degradation, impacts of waste chemicals, resilience, knowledge management. So it will be coming one by one. So what we would like to suggest here is to bring this initiative also under the evaluation. So what is happening at the global level, that should not be the end of this initiative. It should go to the national level, country level, because at the country level, people at risk, they know what is the impact of pollution. So it should reflect.
It will be treated later.
And the last paragraph, it talks about the CSO may play an important role. So when we put may play an important role, then there is no obligation, there is no chance to bring them under accountability. So it should be rephrased with they give them some responsibility and then bring them for accountability. Thank you so much. And I would like to... Bye.
Thank you very much for your contribution. We're now moving to Ben and then to Marjolein.
Great, many thanks, and good morning, everyone. Also, thanks to Juha for that presentation. That was very useful. As the US, I mean, we noted that the GEF sex management response document had some different views, you can say, from the evaluation findings on transport and scaling up. And I think it's first worth saying that, of course, we absolutely value and respect IEO's independence to carry out independent evaluations. But also, I think once findings have been produced, I think it's also healthy to exchange on those conclusions and recommendations. And I think US has also said that we were looking forward to that exchange as well. So I think ultimately, I think it's healthy to have this exchange. And I think that the Secretariat and also maybe the Council shouldn't always, as a matter of course, wholesale agree with all the conclusions and recommendations. I think that's, and I hope you as an evaluator would agree that there's always a process which goes on between evaluators and institutions and what happens next. And sometimes there are differences. That's a healthy position. I think what happened in this occasion is that maybe that process of engagement wasn't completed by the time of the council when we had this last minute differences. And I think maybe that's something which maybe just is something which we should take note of and move forward in the future on that one. Just turning to the scaling up evaluation, I think it's worth recalling from STAP yesterday that this idea of sustainability or durability is a contested concept, and clearly it's useful to do work on this area. And I think it's great that you had in your presentation, you talked about GEF piloting work, which others are subsequently taking forward. Your examples from Costa Rica and Macedonia, I think, were very clear and informative. So I think we also tended to agree with the management response, which is in the paper, that transformation in GEF isn't necessarily about scaling up the interventions themselves or replicating those interventions. I think GEF is a pathfinder, and it's sometimes for others to take for those interventions. So ultimately, I think this has been a useful exchange, and it's useful to continue this exchange going forward. And maybe there is a question about process, about how this is dealt with in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Ben. Next on my list is Marjolein and then Anna.
Thank you. We would also like to say that we welcome the report and the excellent presentation by Juha, and we value the work of the independent evaluation very highly. We think the learning function of evaluations is key, and therefore we look forward to the implementation of the recommendations by the GEF Secretariat in its work program. And as US and UK have said, we attach great importance to the I of the IEO, and we would like to have some more information on the slightly changed recommendation of the scaling up evaluation. Lastly, I would like to say that we welcome also the terms of reference for the peer review of the IEO. Thank you.
Thank you, Marjolein. Flows to Anna and then Cordula.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Like others, we very much appreciate the presentation of Juha and all of the work that's been done by the IEO on the various items that were covered in the presentation. From the Canadian perspective, we support the IEO's recommendation, but in providing our endorsement, we wanted to underline the central importance that we place on the independence of the office. We see the independence of the office as a central tenet of a strong and vibrant performance management framework, and it's consistent with the priority that we have placed on learning. We therefore join the call for more information on the process that resulted in the very last-minute change in the scaling up recommendation, because we also find that this would be important to understand how similar issues would be resolved in the future. So we look forward to engaging on this going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Flows to Cordula and then to Jan Petter.
Well, like others, I would like to thank the IEO for its report. We also believe the IEO is doing a very important job, and we would like to reinforce the I also in the IEO. We are very interested in the results of the completed 3 evaluations, and we welcome the evaluations that are in progress. In particular, we appreciate efforts to evaluate experiences in LDCs and SIDS, as well as in fragile and post-conflict environments. We note that there is a comparatively small share of sustainable transport projects in Africa, and would appreciate clarification for the allocation, and where possible and in line with country ownership, ask for information or possibilities of an increase of GEF sustainable transport projects in this region. We are also somehow concerned about the low share of result indicators for tracking greenhouse gas reduction or fuel savings in transport projects. Merely 42% of the approved projects obviously include an indicator of this kind, and we see room for improvement in the design of monitoring and evaluation and implementation in this kind of projects. We are also concerned about the results, about the fact that GHG emissions of a lot of transport projects were a lot lower than expected, and would like more clarification and action towards improving this aspect. Like others, we have somehow been surprised about the process in which the results on, for us, very important issue, and evaluation on a very important issue, which is the scaling up, the aspect of scaling up, have been dealt with. We believe that this is a key issue for GEF 7, and it was also when we designed the IPs, this was a an issue that had been discussed very heavily during GEF 7, and we want this to be followed up, and we want, especially we want us to be in a position to follow this up properly. So the discussion that arose from the results of the evaluation struck us somehow because it seemed to be on the methodological side, and I was surprised that this had not been discussed earlier, but it was only discussed once the results were on the table, because if it's a methodological question, I believe that you are talking to each other when you're setting up an evaluation. Independence is one thing, but it does not mean that must not be communication. So I was struck by the fact that this only arose at this late stage, and I think we should be talking about this. But I also do not find it very helpful for getting GEF move forward if we have these kinds of discussions at this stage of an evaluation. It does not help, and we want we want the GEF to be credible in its efforts to move towards scaling up, and we believe that if there is findings that show that something needs to be done, one should discuss about the findings and not sort of change the findings and go on with business as usual. So what we really want to know is where's the truth, and what do we need to do to improve scaling up GEF's efforts. And we do not want to sort of cover it up, especially now that it has arisen to the surface.
Thank you, Jan Petter, and then Peter.
Thank you, Chair. It's always interesting when Juha and his team comes out to the deep Finnish forests and give us information, and that information is always interesting and of course independent, which we would also like to stress. We'd like to focus on the scaling up, but first a few comments on other issues. We note the findings and recommendations of the first value for money analysis in the sustainable forest management. In particular, the observation in para 34 of possible trade-offs between environmental and socio-economic benefits in certain cases. And recommendation 3 on improvement of the evidence base for GEF interventions seems important in this regard. We look forward to further work on SFM as elaborated in para 63. And we would like to stress again the importance of analyzing GEF efforts as part of the broader SFM RED Plus landscape. Now back to scaling up, which is closely linked, of course, to the radical transformation of GEF into an instrument that has real impact on drivers at a global scale. And we are happy to see from Juha's presentation that there are many real promising signs already of movement in the right direction. Examples being GEF's role in the de-risking of innovations and to demonstrate benefits at the pilot stage that can be scaled up. The need for upscaling was, of course, a major factor between both GEF 6 and GEF 7 negotiations and the GEF 2020 strategy as well. These are reforms with great potentials, but radical transformation is not always easy, and there are some challenges. How do the integrated programs, the impact programs, relate to traditional focal areas and potential synergies between focal areas? Are they designed in a sufficiently transparent manner? And what are the conceptual links between programmatic visions and concrete activities suggested for child projects? Are we sufficiently aware of the need for integrated approaches at all times? One example being the need to deal with marine litter issues, both from a chemical waste perspective and international waters perspective. Now to the issue of recommendations here. And we were originally in favor of what was there in the first version of the document, and we were not entirely convinced by the arguments against. We would like also, like others, to hear more about the process. And, but we, of course, we also like to consider what was put on the screen some minutes ago. And if you allow, Chair, if we could have the text up again, because I have one question to this proposal, to this revised proposal, which could be important when we consider our options. So if that's possible, could it be put up on the screen? If that's, yeah. So, my question is simply the third paragraph. And I just would like to have confirmed that it's just an omission, that here it's only mentioned project design and not program design. That would actually be quite essential when we should consider this, this alternative language for the recommendation. Especially in a situation where programs are actually using higher and higher percentages of the total funding of the GEF. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan Petter. I know there's a lot to discuss under this agenda item. At the same time, I know we're running enormously over time, so let's discuss what needs to be discussed, but all be very disciplined. Next speaker is Peter, and then Carina.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair, and good morning, colleagues. I'll be as quick as I can to get through just a few points. First of all, I want to give very strong thanks to Juha and to the full team in the IEO for the preparation of this report. Once again, very thorough, thought-provoking and robust evaluation, annual evaluation report. We recognise the important role that the IEO plays as the independent assessor of the work that the GEF is engaged on. And the benefit it brings to both global benefits and the impact of the GEF's work in achieving our goals. So it's a very strong statement of support. In terms of the content, we welcome the new analysis on value for money for GEF initiatives in sustainable forest management. And encourage the IEO's ongoing use of innovative practices and different models to assess value add. And offline, Juha and I have had a bit of a conversation about new innovation and technologies, and I found that very encouraging. There's a link here with the new evaluation policy, which includes a collection of socio-economic and co-benefits data. And this is a positive example of something that's already been mentioned in this exchange around applying learnings from the IEO's evaluations. We are encouraged by the IEO's findings around the GEF's work in creating enabling conditions for scaling up. We support the overall objectives that we should learn from our own and others' experiences to facilitate scaling up in a systemic manner. And with regard to the process points that have been noted, we would echo, I think, first Elizabeth, and then I think pretty much all speakers since then on the importance of good process. And I'll say no more about that, others have spoken. The only thing I would just note is that given our further development of the monitoring and separate evaluation policies as standalone policies, It places, I guess, a stronger premium on effective coordination and communication between the IEO and GEF management across those policies and responses. That becomes more important the more we develop this important work. On updates on the evaluations in progress, we note those and look forward in particular, my constituency looks forward to the strategic country cluster evaluations for SIDS at the next council meeting. We support and note the desire for an improvement of sustainability of GEF project outcomes and the tracking of that by the IEO. I myself, whenever I use the word or see the word durability, I think of those batteries that make the pink bunny go faster, so I'm going to stick with sustainability, Juha, if that's all right with you. Welcome and note the expected level of co-financing for the 2019 cohort and note that it's considerably lower, however, than the portfolio average, so interested in further advice on that in due course. On the management action record, substantial level of adoption of council decisions, there's just one aspect on that I want to highlight, and that is the critical importance, again, that my constituency places on the engagement with Indigenous peoples. We have a policy now on this that came out of GEF 7, and the emphasis on engagement of and with Indigenous peoples and local communities. And we would encourage ongoing monitoring of progress towards delivering that outcome, both from the Secretariat and from the IEO as well. Therefore, finally, support the peer review of the IEO. The purpose it serves to strengthen the IEO's independence, its credibility and its utility, which we are firmly of the view are all high and important. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Next is Karina and then Chaibu.
Thank you, Chair. We would like to thank the IEO for bringing us to these relevant findings. Taking into account, one, the recommendation made by the IEO to ensure that factors influencing scaling up are identified and taken into account as appropriate in project design and implementation, and their impact assessed at midterm and terminal evaluations. And two, considering that within the governments we experience high staff turnover ratios, we encourage the IEO team to perform a periodic mechanism for evaluating performance of implementing agencies and their comparative advantages by region, taking into account the findings of the recent survey performed to focal points regarding how they select which agency they work with. Because from what we found in the website, the last study on comparative advantage for implementing agencies was performed in June 2007. And also, this can be done to executing entities. This is a measure to preserve an institutional memory of the work performed and incorporate lessons learned into the project selection stage as a tool to inform new programs and create an incentives-based mechanism. Thank you.
Thank you, Karina. We're now moving to Chaibu and then to Marita.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We absolutely support the excellent work by the independent office. Somebody said that this is food for thought. Indeed, what I meant to say is that, indeed, through the investment of GEF in our countries, we have investments that are quite green. We have signals of transformation in our communities and in our ecosystems. But the interventions of the GEF are done with other partners, and that they are aligned on the priorities for development in our country. I think that the issue of durability and sustainability, it depends how you would prefer, which term you would prefer. We think that what we should guarantee is the green investment. We should make it durable. Thus, we have to promote the chain of value. The value chain, which means a participation of the private sector, a significant one. Since GEF is not the only one in this type of dynamics, what would be useful in our countries is to have a focus on some dynamics, regional dynamics. For instance, the green revolution, we have done a lot in our countries through GEF, but we would like to have a focus specific on how GEF is promoting a green economy in our countries. And in the Niger Basin also, it is a program that covered all kinds of countries, like Lake Chad too, which has a security issue that is enormous. And we have the correlation with this security program with the climatic change. It is a question of development, truly. If the office could show us how GEF is promoting green economies in the country, that would be quite interesting. That would show us also how through investments from GEF and transfer of technology and the issue of promoting the private sector, which will support us in fighting the climate change. So these are the type of focuses that we would prefer with the office. And we would like also to have a peer review. We support this idea. Thank you.
Thiago, we're moving to Marita and then to Stefan.
Thank you, Co-Chair. I'd like to start by thanking the IAO for the report. We value very much the excellent work being done by the IAO, and we think its independence is key for what we are doing. We can support the revised decision text, but like others, we have also questions and concerns about the process with regard to the scaling up, and would be interested to hear more about that. We can also support the terms of reference for the third peer review. Thank you.
Thank you, Marita. Stefan, please, and then Esther.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Join those who thank the Independent Evaluation Office for the solid work. We note with a certain concern the results in a transport study. The big difference between what was planned ex ante and what was achieved, because ultimately we are going for results. I know that in the response, the management mentioned that they disagreed with the methodology that was used. I'm not an evaluator, nor am I a tech person, but I note there is, and that's a point that Peter made, there's a need for perhaps better communication, but then I want to add, while safeguarding the independence, you know. We do not want a common report by the Independent Evaluation Office that includes already the management response. But when it comes to, it seems to be, at least by reading the documents, that there is a diverging views on the data and methodology used. It would be good if that could be sorted out. Ideally, as you undertake the evaluation, and I don't know what kind of a sharing of results you give, if you give any sneak previews to the Secretariat and the agencies, sort of milestones where you stop by and say, well, this is what we have encountered. I think it would be for a mutual benefit. But as I said, preserving the independence. We support the peer review of the Independent Evaluation Office. It's always good to be checked by your peers because they know about what you're doing, unlike myself. I'm just a consumer and an appreciative consumer. Finally, on the process, thank you for all those that were involved in coming up with a compromise language. It's to me, to some surprise. I don't think that I saw it distributed by email, but maybe it's hidden in the 150 emails that I received since yesterday. And on the wording, I've spent too much time in negotiations not to know that if you insert as appropriate, it basically means everything and nothing. So I would like to have the as appropriate out, if that is appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan, for these appropriate comments. We're now moving to Esther and then to Apana, please.
Buenos días.
Good morning. First of all, I would like to express my appreciation to GEF for his excellent work and also for the very interesting presentation, as usual. With regard to transportation, I would like to mention 2 points that struck me. The decrease in greenhouse gas reduction between what was foreseen and what was attained, and then the aspect of sustainability or durability of the long term of 60%, which seems to me to be excessively low. I hope that the recommendations looked at by the IEO will help to change these 2 very negative points. Now, with regard to scaling up, I would like to underline, as my colleagues have said, that the subject of communication between units in GEF is important. Given the importance of scaling up for impact programs, it would be important to show a united front and that frictions not be so apparent. That is, to negotiate, to communicate finally in the final analysis, because I think this has been something that has been a bit shocking for all of us. Also, with regard to the next evaluations, I think that they're all very good, very pertinent, very relevant, very well done. I also support the terms of reference. And finally, I am able to support the recommended decision, maybe with the amendment proposed by John. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther. Next speaker is Apana, and last speaker, Ludovica.
Thank you. So I will also be quick and only focus on 2 papers. First is the value for money paper. I would like to echo the comments made by Norway and Australia to focus on this linkage, not necessarily a trade-off, between socioeconomic benefits and environmental benefits in sustainable forest management. I believe this is a very insightful recommendation and should be followed up as strongly as possible, particularly because the CSO representative have also highlighted the importance of local community in ensuring, whether you call it sustainability, durability, or value for money, but keeping the good work going, I believe that this recommendation is extremely useful to us. The second point I have is that I'm happy to note the recommendation on improving the evidence base because, again, we have been reiterating the need to have strong data and evidence-based decision-making in GEF, in its programmatic decisions and in its monitoring. And I would also here reiterate the need to have strong baseline data, develop country systems, and use gender disaggregated data. Third, we are also happy to note the recommendation on further improving the geolocation data and the use of, I think, remote sensing applications, satellite-based applications, because even in the discussion on the policy for monitoring, it may be recalled that we advocated better use of technology to be able to measure results and the sustainability and the impact of the work that we do. Second, I will come to the report that has got the most attention, that is the evaluation of GEF support to scaling up impact. Now, here I look at this report in a very positive way, and I would in fact say that it is a positive acknowledgement of GEF's role in de-risking innovation, going where no man has gone before, that kind of a thing, trying to find strong demonstrative effort in its pilots. And also it highlights the importance of selecting the right partners for ensuring that the project that we do has got a scalable impact, that that people find value in the work that is done through our pilot project. So I endorse the fact that when you select partners, you look at the comparative advantage, you look at different modes by which you can build scaling up into the project. So I see a lot of positive acknowledgement of the work that GEF is already doing through this report. I am extremely appreciative of the suggestion to have a stronger framework articulated. Sometimes one does the work, one is following certain principles. It always helps to articulate the same. And particularly this framework and these multiple modes which have been highlighted in IEO's report will, I hope, Nauko, help us to do what I would call design optimization and outcome maximization, if I'm allowed to provide a slogan for your framework. The second thing is that regarding the revision of the recommendations, I again appreciate the Secretariat because they have been very honest in the ferocity of their pushback. It is good to have such open communication and know what people really feel about things. But on the whole, after going to through the report and the management response, at least from my side, I feel that we find that the management and indeed the GEF program will actually be served well by taking up the recommendations for adoption. And here, with a nod to Ben Green here for our colonial legacy, if I can suggest, instead of appropriate, whether you would like to adopt the recommendations in the best possible manner. Respecting the spirit of the evaluation. I think that will be useful for the program as a whole. And finally, yes, we support the peer review. I will just take half a second to thank Juha for being responsive to what he feels is the mood of the council and giving us more lively presentations. Thank you. Responsiveness is important. Thank you.
Thank you, Aparna. Next is Ludovica. We have two final requests for the floor. Leonardo, and very briefly again, Rachna.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the IO for their presentation and for the study that they present to us. I think they are very useful and it's very important. I think speaking after a partner is very difficult to be very, because she explained very well what is in my mind. However, I think also that is very positive, the substance of the evaluation on the one that is more criticized, that is the scaling up impact. And I agree with the term of reference that has been presented. So I don't have anything on the substance. I have the problem on the process because, like others, I mean, not only on the process, the question that has been raised by my colleague of US and the UK and many others on more transparent, on more clarity on the recommendation that has been presented, but also on the way this has been done. Because I'm a little bit concerned that this morning I arrived here, there was a REV document that I didn't know it was there because, I mean, I didn't receive any information about it, and I have requested to approve a decision that I didn't read before, and it's just at the last minute. I mean, we know very well, has been clearly said by previous colleagues, that sometimes just changing a comma can change completely the meaning of a sentence. So I want to be sure what I am approving, especially because English is not my mother language. So I would appreciate for the future to have much more transparency on the change of the document and the recommendation, on decision. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ludovica, please, Leonardo.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Coprésidente.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. I'd like to thank the IEO for its very interesting presentation. We support the work program, and we'll have a closer look of the evaluation regarding the poorest countries and the lessons to be drawn from it. I support my colleagues. We all need more clarification regarding the methodology for the reduction of CO2 calculation. We support the independence of the evaluation office, and there should be a deep communication between the Secretariat and the IEO before the texts are sent to the Council. I support what Rashina has said. We need to have a common framework for evaluation regarding comparable sectors, and we'd like to have the feedback from the IEO to see how and if there are alignment activities between the various environment or climate funds. Still regarding methodology, we'd like to repeat that data are extremely important to us. Those data have to be well collected. Aparna has said it very well. Those data are important to measure impacts, and I was highly interested to see that you can see a correlation between the wealth of households, the interventions of the GEF in the evaluations. This is a correlation, it is true, but it's not necessarily an impact measurement. So we'd like to know whether you really have the data which could show that there is a real impact which is different from a correlation. And that is important in order to measure the efficiency of GEF's activities. Thank you.
Thank you, Co-Chair. After consultation with my alternate, we have another point to make. You know, sometimes there are circumstances in a country for scaling up, but sometimes the circumstances for a project and in a country for scaling up is limited. So we therefore just want to get the assurance from the GEF Secretariat that in case the evaluation shows limited scope for scaling up, the countries are not penalized in any way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before returning the floor to Yua and Naoko, maybe it's good to summarize where we stand with the recommended Council decision. The text that is not in front of you, unfortunately, but in front of me, there it is what we have been talking about, with a suggestion to add a program and in the last paragraph where it says in project design and implementation, this would be in program and project design and implementation. Then there was a suggestion by Stefan to strike out as appropriate. And then we would still need to add, if all of you agree with that, the line from the original conclusion that was, or decision that was included in the document that was distributed, which would read, the Council approves the terms of reference for the professional peer review of the Independent Evaluation Office. If I'm not mistaken, that's where we are with the text, and I'd now like to give the floor to Yua and Naoko to reflect.
Thanks so much. Very delightful discussion, and I am really happy to hear all of the support to the independence of the IEO. Our joke always in the evaluation field is that nobody loves independent evaluation, and certainly not those who get evaluated, but apparently the ones who use the evaluations tend to have more appreciation for it. Let me start with this most important discussion about the scaling up report and how did we come up with this revised decision. I'm really sorry that it was such a last moment thing, and obviously we didn't communicate the final changes very appropriately and adequately. The thing is that in a way I've heard now some people say in the council that we should have had a united front when coming here to present it. Others have said that we don't want to hear an IEO report that already incorporates the management views. So I'm not quite sure. I tend to think that that it's very positive that there is some tension and that these things are brought up into the open, because that's you know that is proof of the fact that the IEO is actually independent, and the management, like it was said, that was very transparent in its ferocity of the pushback. I'm just quoting. I think this is something that we have to do. And when there are, we cannot always agree on everything. And the beauty of the GEF system is obviously the fact that the Council is the final arbiter here, who actually makes the decision on what the decision should be. It's not my decision, it's not the Secretariat's decision, it's the Council decision. And you have to hear everything from all sides and finally arrive at your informed decision on what should be done. Now, it is not uncommon either that in evaluation we discuss what the recommendation should be with the stakeholders and with the evaluand, so to say. We conducted this evaluation, as we conduct all of our evaluations, in a fully independent manner. We consulted with the GEF Secretariat and GEF Management and GEF agencies at the onset of this evaluation. What are the questions that we are going to ask? And we did give them sneak previews before we came to this meeting. The analysis is totally independent, and the conclusions of the evaluation have not been at all mitigated, so to say. Then, then comes, okay, so this is what we found. So what to do about it? That's another question, of course. Then you can actually start. Somebody might actually argue that we as evaluators are not the ones who will be facing the day-to-day challenges of implementing recommendations. So we should listen to the ones who will be there. Now, if you look into the compare this final recommended decision with the amendments that the Council is wisely recommending and the original ones, so there's actually not that much difference. I mean, the whole thing, how we have it's a framing, it's a phrasing and a framing thing in some ways, and in many ways the fact that this new recommendation says that the impact should be assessed at midterm and terminal evaluations is actually stronger than the original one was. So, but having said that, I just repeat that it is up to the Council, of course, to decide what the final recommendation should be. Should it be the original one or the revised one or a revised one, or and so forth. Very briefly on some of these other things is, for example, one question came out about the greenhouse gas emissions in the transport sector and whether the avoided emission reductions are what are they based on? Again, I just say we used the figures that we're reporting in project terminal evaluations. No modification, no adjustment to the methodology. We just took the figures that were reported by the agencies in their terminal evaluations. So that's what it is, I should say. What should I otherwise say? I don't know. Maybe the thing is regarding the indicators and common indicators, common frameworks, and so forth. The only concern that we have there is really the fact that they can indicators can be relevant and adjusted and so on, but we do have the responsibility, and the Council has asked us always, how do we aggregate results from projects and programs to the global level, and that's where the common indicator frameworks basically comes from. Did I miss anything significant, or? The discussion, we did have process discussion. Yeah, yeah. I hope I responded mostly.
Thank you. You please now go.
Thank you so much for an opportunity to come back again. As invited by US and others, that why management and push back on original analysis. So I just want to maybe make a few comments. First and foremost, we very much share with the IO office that the goal to achieve, to find out the way to achieve the higher impacts. So from that point of view, we very much appreciated the intention of this study, and no difference between the two offices of the importance of this exercise. So that's number one. And we were actually very happy, I'm personally very happy, that the report started with the GEF 2020, which we put so much of the emphasis of how to achieve the higher impacts, and they recognized as the importance of integration of the system change, so that we were all together in it. That the slight issue just came in, that the methodology side, and where it's actually the evaluation office can only evaluate after things are done, so that their major sample is actually the ending. Most of the sample analysis kind of GEF from pilot phase to GEF 3 or something like that, where the major, maybe the typical project is more like to do something pilot, then scaled up either by the following projects or somebody else. So that is the concept of the kind of the major sample, which kind of leading to a little bit of the actually the leads to the recommendation of common framework, the common definition, and the common indicator. So that why that our challenge is that by now we move quite significantly from this pilot phase of the first 10 years of scaling up to us much more diverse way of achieving the higher impacts. The IA integrated approach pilot to IP have a very strong theory of change to identify how to actually to maximize the impacts by actually catalyzing the system change. Then that the focal area still do have a very chunk of the resources have its own way of achieving higher scale. So that so what I think that we are trying to say in my management response is that it's actually much better if we could really articulate project by project, program by program, what is that the pathway to achieve the higher impacts, rather than trying to come up with this original proposal of common definition, the common framework, and the common indicator, which in our view may unduly constrain the potential of achieving higher impacts by project, or by focal area, by impact program. So that that's the way I think we debated, or we kind of make a comment that could we, isn't it better for us to do more like an how do you know that to articulate that the project by project, focal area by focal area, program by program, and to go for that. And that is why I thought that that the revised recommendation clearly mention that, okay, let's do articulation rather than just doing the common framework. That I think will give us much more way to realizing the higher impact. So that is why I said that I would be very pleased to see the revised recommendation, which we wholeheartedly support, and very happy to include program here. Very happy to take that as appropriate out, because that is what we believe that we can do. And the important thing to us is that to really recognize that to the difference of each project and the program and the country by country, focal area by focal area, different way of achieving that higher impacts. That's what we really want to recognize it. So in just going back to the Yuha's point about the process and your point about the process question, I also very much agree with you, that and we always kind of talk that the independence is absolutely important. At the same time, we also try to find a way of our both offices are useful, so that the important thing is that while keeping the independence of the independent office and analysis, but we also try to see that the recommendation is something useful, implementable, and useful for the GEF's, the final, the total ultimate goal. So that is a kind of balance we are really trying to strike, and maybe just one, and usually we do it quite good, and appreciating, respecting independence, but also try to sort out something between to make the recommendation useful. This time we may not have enough time to go through all of it. That's why that we end up here, that making a very clear statement, but then we are actually going back to our process of how to make your analysis usable and meaningful for the GEF's mission. So I would say that I'm very happy that this process ending like this, and while it put us some stress on your side, but we wholeheartedly support that, and I would like to go for this revised recommendation. So let me stop here. I really would like to thank you, Hassan, the comments and the presentation on this and the round. Thank you.
Thank you, Naoko and Yuha. With that, I hope we can adopt the revised recommended council decision with the addition of project and with the deletion of as appropriate. Thank you all very much for your constructive approach and for your elaborations. I think we can now move on then to the next item on our agenda, which was supposed to start at 10 a.m. this morning, and is called GEF Evaluation Policy. And here I'd like to invite Yuha to introduce the document related to this, and to make clear also how this supersedes previous documents. Yuha, please.
Thank you very much, and I will be very, very brief here. Can we get the presentation on the? It's not here. Yeah. So basically, so this is as you have heard already yesterday in the discussion about the monitoring policy. We decided that go our separate ways between monitoring and evaluation. There was a monitoring and evaluation policy from 2010, but it's good practice, and we are following what all multilateral banks and the UN agencies have done now, and have a separate policy on evaluation. So this policy would supersede the one of the 2010, and aims to bring together and clarify the guiding principles and mandatory requirements for evaluation across the partnership. And one of the things that we have now, in the intervening years since 2010, so 9 years have passed, and lots of new policies have been developed in the GEF context, not least, for example, the gender policies that we have brought in, and so now this new evaluation policy equally reflects the other GEF policies that have been brought in. It brings in the elements of the co-benefits that were less explicit in the past, and actually codifies what we have been already doing, which is this geospatial coordinates for projects when feasible rather than appropriate, maybe both. We want to use the GEF's additionality framework that we presented to the Council in December in this policy also. And perhaps most importantly, the new policy addresses the issue of the programs. Yeah, so that's you see in the policy, it's an update more than a new policy, but it reflects those things that I was just saying. There's a couple of issues that you have to we have to follow up and you have to follow up. One is the easy thing for us, that we will update our guidelines when it comes to the implementation of the policy. So we will have to update the terminal evaluation guidelines for the agencies, and we have to incorporate the issue of the assessment of GEF's additionality in those. What you would have to do is what we left blank in this is the IEO director's term and the terms of reference of the person who will follow me, basically. Yeah, so that's it. So we have a recommended council decision here, and I hand it over back to the chair.
Thank you, Juha. That was very clear. I want to invite council members to give their comments and raise their questions, please. Peter, please.
Thank you, Carola, and thank you, Juha, and for another strong document, another strong IEO contribution to the GEF partnership and the GEF's work. I'll again try to be brief, conscious of time. We are supportive. We have a couple of thoughts on the way through that maybe you could come back to after there's been a round of comments. Consistent with what I've said in associated agenda item discussions, we support the continued and indeed strengthening work between the IEO and the GEF Secretariat to ensure consistency, in particular across the now two policies, monitoring, and evaluation. And we discussed that in the last agenda item, but it's relevant here also. And I referenced this also in the last agenda item, the collection of more data, and particularly regarding additionality and measuring value add, aligns with recommendations from the previous item on semi-annual evaluation report. The only thing I would add is that with our constituency, we would like to emphasise that this be done in a way that's mindful towards a sort of capacity and resource burden on recipient countries, and maybe some thoughts from you about how that can be ensured. This policy is another opportunity for us to emphasise the importance we place on the work of the IEO and how robust evaluations can evidence GEF interventions adding up to meaningful impacts from our work. One clarification I'd just like to seek is around the minimum timeliness requirements for evaluation policies. Whether there's any requirements associated with the different types of evaluation that are in the paper at paragraph 14. Our constituency supports the principles-based approach taken by the policy. We would, though, like to see a culturally responsive evaluation included as a principle. You know, in itself necessary for sound evaluations. The cross-cultural context is particularly relevant in the Pacific, which is close to Australia, New Zealand and Korea's heart, as you know. The principle of gender equality is critical, but we would like to see that perhaps defined, and maybe this is an implementation, a little more broadly to apply to a gender-responsive approach, which is a broader and a more inclusive take on gender equality. And similarly, maybe in implementation, disability inclusiveness would be relevant here also, which we'd like to continue to advocate. We think maybe a policy commitment to greater transparency by publishing online GEF evaluations within a certain time frame would be a positive addition. But as I said at the beginning, very strong endorsement for the evolving policy platform and IEO's contribution toward that. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I'd now like to give the floor to Lauren and then to Anna.
Thank you, Carola. And in the interest of time, since we're running late, I'll be rather quick. I mean, we generally support the revised evaluation policy and appreciate very much the main updates, which you just indicated. Like we had on the last item, we had a very rich discussion on some of the findings from the evaluations, and we very much appreciate the possibility to discuss this in Council. Getting back to a point that we made yesterday on the monitoring policy, we really see a need to use the information coming from the different evaluations as knowledge management and in terms of lessons learned within the whole GEF partnership. And we wonder, for example, how does the staff use results from or findings from evaluations when they're looking at new PIFs, or how does the Secretariat use the findings from evaluations in terms of learning? I think this maybe could be a discussion that we could have at a future council meeting on the whole knowledge management and lessons learned within the GEF partnership. And we should also note that in the MOPAN assessment, it states that the GEF implementing agencies still tend to rely on their own knowledge management systems instead of the knowledge generated in the GEF partnership. Finally, we would like to make a small change to the policy. We would like to add we would like to ask the IEO to make post-completion evaluations, not, of course, for all projects, because we understand that this would be very costly and time-consuming, but we would like the IEO to look at a sample of projects, and we let them decide criteria, for example, on which type of projects they would like to look at. But we believe that by doing post-completion evaluations, so evaluations a few years after a project is, or a program is finalized, would be able to give us some information on sustainability issues, which we've been discussing, but also on scaling up. You know, have projects or programs being scaled up after the GEF-funded project or program is finalized. And we also believe that this is an issue that will be discussed at the next GCF council meeting. So we also see the importance of harmonizing, you know, approaches between the GCF and the GEF. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lauren. Floor is now to Anna and then to Conrad.
Thank you very much. We are pleased to see all of the updates that have been made to the policy. And in particular, we welcome efforts to include gender equality, but would very much support the comments that were made by Australia to move towards a more gender-responsive approach to evaluation. We are also happy to see that the evaluation policy has been revised to meet international standards and best practice, including the ability to evaluate based on data for actual results achieved. We note that the policy makes mention in one area of Indigenous peoples as stakeholders in evaluation. We encourage the GEF to ensure that the inclusion of Indigenous peoples occurs throughout the evaluation process, and is aligned with the GEF's principles and guidelines for engagement with Indigenous peoples document. We would also like to suggest that minimum requirement 3, which is in paragraph 30, I believe, more clearly present what the minimum requirements are for terminal evaluations. For example, actual results achieved are included in the list on assessment requirements, but are not a reporting requirement. And finally, we can support the point raised by our colleague from Norway about introducing post-completion evaluations, or at least considering it, to ensure that the GEF is able to assess the sustainability of its initiatives as well as the prospect of scaling up. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. We're now moving to Konrad and then to Ben.
Thank you. We share the appreciation of this updated evaluation policy. We think it's very comprehensive, and the elements that have been added, that have been mentioned by Juha and also in the text, are all very relevant. Nevertheless, what we are missing a little bit is the reflection of programmatic evolution of GEF, and notably this ambition of GEF 7 to become really transformative and to go for system change. We think that this notion of transformational change and system change, as well as the sustainability linked to it, also in relation to the discussion we had on this issue, should also be included into the update of this policy. Considering also the importance of the country ownership that has been mentioned in several contexts, we also think that this notion should be included into the policy and systematically be looked at in the different evaluations, to what extent such ownership really has been strengthened. And we also would like to join Norway in asking for the inclusion of the post-completion evaluations. Thank you.
Thank you, Konrad. Next is Ben and then Komlan.
Yeah, many thanks, and many thanks for the update policy, which I think is useful, and I think it's useful. It's useful to see the separation of the two policies. Looking back to the last item, just one question in terms of, I think there's a line in paragraph 25 about the potential for scale-up and replication, and just questioning whether that is appearing in the OECD guidance. So useful to get some feedback on that one. But happy to be corrected if it's sitting in that place. I think the point being is that we all agree on the importance of transformation and sustainability. How the rather than necessarily replication, I'm noting Naoko's comments in the last item in terms of achieving a higher scale and the importance of achieving higher impact, obviously through the impact programs and doing that through a clearly articulated theory of change to maximize system change. I think that's a very good way of looking at it. So it's just a question about whether that particular line in terms of potential for scale up and replication should be included in this policy. I also just going to the point from Norway as well. Yes, we'd also be interested to consider the potential for post-completion evaluations as well, and how that could be integrated in a cost-effective way. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Komlan, please, and then Marita.
Merci.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to congratulate you for the work that was done and for this presentation, for the update and a number of new things that have been integrated. But I would rather be more interested in the link that should exist between this new policy, new evaluation policy that we have been given here, as well as the monitoring policy, the link between the two that we discussed yesterday. How is this monitoring policy at the service of the evaluation policy? We see a distinction between the two, but what are the results of the monitoring policy? They should actually feed into the evaluation, of course, the evaluation policy as well. And just for information, for my own information, I'd like to know how you select countries that will be beneficiaries or chosen with respect to evaluations. How do you choose these countries? Thank you.
There's also a request.
Thank you, Conran.
But Marita first.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair, and thank you, Juha, for your presentation. We, the civil society, strongly endorses the comment made by Lauren of Norway about feeding back into project development, and particularly in view of the wake-up call provided by the UN on biodiversity loss. And this should be, we feel, something that should be taken very much into account. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Marita, please.
Thank you, Chair. We welcome and support the proposed policy. I just took the floor to express support for Norway's proposal on post-completion evaluation. Thank you.
Thank you, Marita. That completes this round of comments and questions. I'd like to give the floor to Juha to respond to many of the suggestions made.
Thanks very much, and thank you so much for the support again. I think these were some of the very useful points that included in the cultural responsiveness of the evaluation, the country ownership, gender responsiveness, and transparency, for example, which are possibly policy issues that we could, insert a little bit here and there in the policy actually, and to be explicit about it. Some of the things are, of course, then things that we can specify in the guidance that we give to agencies, for example, when it comes to the terminal evaluations and their own policies. The knowledge management is a point well taken. We may not be. Maybe some other partners should also respond to that rather than me. Then there's this whole issue of the post-completion evaluations, and like it has been noted by the council members, it may not be something that we will be able to do systematically across the board always. But I would like to point out that when we do our evaluations, and for example, the strategic country cluster evaluations that we are currently doing in LDCs and SIDS and in the Sudano-Sahelian belt, they all include explicitly going back to projects that have been closed maybe 5 years ago, and we are tracking people who used to be the project managers, and we are tracking people who used to be involved, and we are doing field visits to areas to see whether there is actually something left of these projects. So it's not it's a doable idea, and we try to do it. It may not be a thing that we do really, that we take 1,500 projects and say that let's go there 5 years later and see what happened, but within the context of evaluations, whether they are thematic evaluations or whether they are country cluster evaluations, we definitely can do that. I think that's all.
Thank you, Juha. My question to the Council is now if, with this explanation, we want to adopt the Council decision as proposed in the document, or if Council members want to make some changes to the text before we approve it. Lauren, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Carola, and thank you, Juha, for those explanations. I think also understanding or hearing the support from other council members, I think we would like to see reflected somewhere in the policy, maybe after the paragraphs on terminal evaluations, a sentence or something saying that you will look at post-completion evaluations, or that you will be doing that for a sample of projects. I think for us it would be important that it's reflected in the policy now. Thank you.
Thank you. Juha, you want to respond?
I think we can do that, and it will be a fairly simple addition to the policy, and yeah, we'll do it.
Okay, then we agree that the policy will be adopted and that it will be changed at this point. This specific point will be added in the policy. This leaves the council decision as it is, but in the chair's summary we will include that this change will be made. In the highlights, I was told we have to include it. That then concludes agenda item 11 for today and allows us to move on to agenda item 12, which is the 4-year work program and budget of the Independent Evaluation Office. And I'd like to invite Juha to introduce this point. Juha, please.
Hi again. I think I will be getting faster and faster, I think, with these presentations. You have in the document, you have the list of the evaluations that we are proposing for this work program and throughout the whole GEF 7 period. It is somewhat with some shock that I note that OPS 6, the sixth comprehensive evaluation of the GEF, was presented to the Council already actually 2 years ago, which means that OPS 7, the seventh comprehensive evaluation, is only 2 years down the line. And that is a fact of life. Our life circles around very much these comprehensive evaluations. What we are, how we have designed this evaluation work program is so that all of the evaluations and the studies that we do, including some of the ones that we have already presented to you, will be inputs into the seventh comprehensive evaluation that will then in its turn be an input to the next replenishment negotiations for GEF 8, actually. I will, of course, I will not, we have a large number of evaluations, so I'm not going to go through them here. You have the list, and I will be very much welcoming any comments, suggestions, especially suggestions for dropping evaluations, but also adding evaluations and focusing on certain issues as they come. We also have of course, a very, and this links to the previous discussion, we have a important function in knowledge management, and the knowledge that is generated through these evaluations obviously has to be more effectively and more efficiently fed back into the decision making when it comes to program development, project development, and so forth. We look forward to continuing our practices of, for example, feeding back to the Council and to the partnership shorter nuggets of what the evaluations have found and so forth, and doing this as much in real time as possible. I think last time around in the comprehensive evaluation, it was I think most of us, and I hope most of you too, found it useful that we had these notes on evaluations on where, you know, as soon as we had findings coming out and so forth. So we will continue doing that process. So this is then the budget that I'm presenting only refers to the fiscal year 2020, which starts on 1st of July. The framework budget, the overall framework budget for the GEF, for the IEO during the GEF 7 period was actually approved by the Council and in connection with the replenishment process already last year. So we have taken that as a given, while obviously at the same time we are aware of the replenishment conditions that encourage us to be efficient and increase our efficiency as needed. This is then the next year's budget, which is up for approval by this council meeting. You will see that this is actually, it's about a quarter of our 4-year budget. But as you know, our budget is not linear. It is not equally divided by 4 years, because next year it is likely to go up quite much when we gear up towards conducting the 7th comprehensive evaluation of the GEF, and then following the presentation of that evaluation, there will be a drop in the budget. As it happens now, because we are already doing these evaluations for the next comprehensive one, so it is approximately a fourth of our 4-year budget, as you have given it to us. You will note that the fixed costs may appear relatively high in connection in relation to the evaluation budget and the variable cost. This can be explained by our business model. So the fixed costs include notably the staff costs, but also things like office space and things that we don't have control over, and the overheads taken by the World Bank for hosting us and so forth. Why this is so high is the fact that our business model is that our evaluators, our evaluation team members in the office are the ones who lead the evaluations, who design them, who conduct much of the work, and who actually write the reports. So our use of consultants, which comes down to this evaluations budget here, basically, we try to use consultants very strategically when, and there are cases, of course, when we conduct evaluations in areas where we don't have in-house expertise. If you need to have expertise in a particular technical area, we will bring that in through consultants, but the evaluations will still be led by our staff. And on the other hand, we have moved increasingly to using consultants in the countries, from the countries and from the regions where we conduct our evaluations, which makes a lot of sense, because then you get the local knowledge, you get the knowledge and understanding of the context and the situations and what is happening in the countries, but also you also provide actual capacity development for the evaluation function in the countries. So I'll leave it at that. I hope, and of course I will answer whatever you ask.
Thank you, Juha. And with that offer to answer whatever we ask, I'd like to open the floor for the Council. Please, Munenari, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. I'd like to thank the IEO for presenting us the FY20 work program and the budget. And I have just one comment on the budget for FY20. As I noted yesterday, the size of the admin budget proposed by the GEF Secretariat yesterday was smaller than the annual average size of the corporate budget we have agreed in the GEF 7 replenishment process by 10%. On the other hand, if we take a look at the proposed size of the budget for the IEO, this is a bit slightly higher than the annual average of the corporate size of budget we agreed for the IEO during the GEF 7 replenishment process. So I'd like to encourage the IEO office to rigorously apply the efficiency measures introduced, adopted in the World Bank capital increase package, so that the actual savings can be generated in the implementation of the budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Molinari. Floor is now to Esther, please.
Hola, solo quería. I would like an explanation about the management line for 2020. I think it's high, and there's no explanation that correlates to it. We're talking about 260 million. On the other hand, for my government and for the knowledge of all of us, we would like to have the table of the distribution of the annual budget at the same time as and with the same lines as the prior budget, so that we can see the evolution, because I tried to compare it to 2019 and then don't find the same lines. In this case, I would like to have an explanation that is more detailed about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther. Floor is now to Conrad, please.
Thank you, Juha, for submitting this work program and the budget. We are basically in agreement with it. We especially welcome also the evaluation that is foreseen on the IPs in the year 21. Regarding the additional resources that are requested on your side, or absorption of resources in the context of impact programs, we were wondering whether there are some opportunities to compensate with a bit less work in other fields than the impact programs. In view of the OPS 7, the 7th comprehensive evaluation, we would like to suggest that what is mentioned, that the focus should be on the additionality, innovation, and transformational change, that this is not only indicative, but that this is the definitive focus. It's now mentioned that this will be indicative. And of course, we also expect that this OPS will very much focus on results and impact, and notably on sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd now like to give the floor to civil society, who does not want to have the floor anymore. So we move on to Jan Petter, please.
Thank you, Chair. We would like to thank the IO for this draft FOIA program and budgets. In the view of this constituency, the IO has played a very important role in development of policies over the years, in particular in conducting the overall performance studies informing replenishment negotiations. And we trust that this will continue. Under this work program, we will see for the first time real evaluation of integrated programs designed to deal with the global drivers. Comprehensive information on the IAPs from GEF 6 and formative reviews of impact programs started in GEF 7. We look forward to this very important information, which will, of course, also inform the next replenishment negotiations. We also appreciate the other topics listed under the program, including, of course, the comprehensive evaluation of the GEF towards the end of G7, which has great potential to inform the next replenishment negotiations. as explained in the document, the large pool of information becoming available now provide opportunities for analysis to an extent that was previously not possible. Finally, under agenda item 11, we suggested that the Council should agree on the need for post-completion evaluations of some projects and programs. We would like to be informed as to whether this could be accommodated within the IO budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan-Peter. Over to you, Juha, as this completes our round of questions.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the comments on the program and would be very happy to firm up the OPS 7 theme on focusing on these issues of additionality, impact, sustainability, and so forth. The budget, indeed, so it may be that this first-year budget is slightly higher than 1/4 of the total, but like I said earlier, so this is our budget is not divided into equal chunks. You will see that it's the 2 first years would be by necessity be somewhat higher than the 2 last years of the budget, because we have to deliver the OPS 7 comprehensive evaluation by 2021, and that will require a fair bit of work. Maybe that was a slight understatement. It will require quite a lot of work from ourselves. And if you look at the GEF 6 budget that we had, and mind you, I forgot to say actually that because the IEO comes 1 year behind, so this is the one. This has been the last year of the GEF 6 budget for us. So if you look at that trajectory, you will see that there was a bulk 3 years ago, and then actually the costs went down. Having said that, we are acutely aware of the need to be efficient and try to find places where we can do some cost cuttings and where we can enhance our efficiency in doing things, and in the spirit of the replenishment and in the spirit of the capital increase package. So this is what we propose now, and as having as our framework budget for the coming year, but we will obviously a year from now we will report back to you on what the actuals were, and we hope that that they were that we actually gained some efficiencies there. And of course, IEO work program has been increasing with new kinds of programs and so on, and we have to continue delivering to the council what we could do. Now, on the question on the line items, yeah. So I guess we'll take a look at the budget format, and we will be able to, of course, to come back to you on the line items and the same kind of a breakdown of line items as we had earlier. Yeah. So we can produce to you probably within the day, right? Today.
Thank you, Juha. With that, I think we can approve both the budget and the work program of the IEO. And that concludes this item. Thank you very much. Please, over to you now.
Thank you, Carola. So let us move on to the next item. I just want to remind ourselves that we have 2 more items this morning and before lunch, which is 12:30, and we have an important guest to come, so that let's try to be as quickly as possible. I also want to mention one more thing, that this morning I announced that we will have a session to actually handle the homework from yesterday. Carola reminds me of that, and I forgot one more homework, which is our language about sustainability. I mean, our proposal for what's the next step for the sustainability, so that before we enter into the any other business, we have 3 homework. One is the policy on monitoring and the sustainability issue, and actually that our proposal of this transparency of the dealing with an IP selection thing. So 3 homework to come. So with that, I'd like to invite Françoise and the team to come here and present a next agenda item, which is a non-compliance case.
Thank you, Chair. We'll be discussing the paper Informing the Council on Possible Non-Compliance with Environmental and Social Safeguards. Last December, the Council requested the Secretariat to propose a procedure to inform Council of possible non-compliance with the minimum standards contained in the Environmental and Social Safeguard Policy, with the idea that where reputational risks for the GEF may arise, the Council wanted to be informed. So it was requested to come back in the spring of 2019 with a proposal. So following the Council's request and building on agencies' existing accountability, grievance, and conflict resolution system, the Secretariat proposes that the policy on environmental and social safeguard, recently adopted, be amended to assure more timely reporting on possible cases of non-compliance. More specifically, the Secretariat proposes that the existing requirement of annual reporting, which are set out in paragraph 15 of the Safeguards Policy, be replaced with a requirement that agencies report promptly to the Council through the Secretariat cases reported to their respective accountability, grievance, and conflict resolution systems that they have themselves determined to be within the scope of their review. The Council requested reporting on cases where, and I quote the decision, reputational risk for the GEF may arise. In this regard, the proposed approach is designed to build on the diligence and established procedure of agencies in assessing and reviewing complaints received. The analysis and the consultation carried out by the Secretariat indicate that this represents an objective way to inform the Council of cases of possible non-compliance in a timely manner, while enabling Council members to directly assess any associated reputational risks. In practice, the Secretariat proposes that reports from agencies include a summary of the case and its status, with a link to a page on the agency website where stakeholders may access further up-to-date information regarding the nature of the claim, the status of the processing, associated documents, and results, eventually, of any reviews. The Secretariat itself would post such summaries and links in a designated space on the conflict resolution section of its website. It is important to note that this document focuses on cases of possible non-compliance involving environmental and social risks. Reporting on possible non-compliance with agencies' fiduciary policies and safeguards including cases related to fraud, corruption, and misuse of funds, will be addressed separately as part of the planned update of the GEF's minimum fiduciary standards for Council consideration at the next, the 57th meeting in the fall of 2019. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francoise. So let me open the floor for your comments and questions. Litz first, followed by Marita. Elizabeth.
Great, thank you. So we thank you very much for this presentation and for responding to our call for some adjustments. We think that we are close, but not quite there. So we're supportive of the real-time updating procedure. However, we're concerned that the amendment also proposes to drop the requirement that agencies report on how such cases have been addressed. While we understand that in practice there may be a link to a web page where council members can go for updates, we think that the GEF policy should be to require that agencies update the council through the Secretariat on the status of these cases and how they've been resolved at the appropriate time. We also believe that there is still value in providing the GEF Council with an annual report summarizing outstanding cases and their status. This would allow us to monitor trends and track issues in one place. Thanks.
Now, may I call on Marita, followed by Munenari. Sorry, Munenari.
Thank you, Co-Chair. We support the proposed amendment, and I think we can also support the amendment suggested by the United States. We think these amendments will contribute to strengthen the accountability and transparency of programs. We would just like to ask for a clarification on the scope of reporting, agency reporting. In the event that agencies have standards that go beyond the minimum standards of the GEF, are they also expected to report on non-compliance with what is beyond the GEF minimum standards? It would be good if you could clarify that. Then also finally, I can just say that we welcome the forthcoming review of the agency compliance with the GEF minimum standards and to discuss it at the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marita. May I call on Munenari? Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank the staff for proposing the revised policy for the possible non-compliance with regard to the ESG safeguards. And I have one question about para 15. I'm looking at the track change version of para 15, and I find that after deletion of the how such cases have been, the language of how such cases have been addressed, the staff proposes to include a new language which is which these mechanisms have determined to be within the scope of their review. And I'd like to know the intention of the inclusion of this new language, and specifically I'd like to know whether the inclusion of this new language would delay the timing of the reporting or reduces the scope of the reporting. Thank you.
Thank you. May I call on Marjorie, followed by Peter.
Yes, thank you. Like others, we welcome the amendment to the policy and welcome the timely reporting to Council. Although we have a question to that, because the GEF Secretariat will be promptly informed by the agencies, but we think it is important that Council will be informed timely as well, and not only by the annual report. So perhaps a mechanism could be found that a notification will be sent to Council members once a new information is placed on the GEF website. And we agree very much with the US that we would still like to know how the follow-up has been dealt with by agencies. And we're looking forward to discussing the non-compliance with fiduciary policies and safeguards next meeting. And although it's not entirely comparable, the now suggested amendment to the policy on safeguards can act as a best practice, perhaps. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, may I call on Peter, followed by Gianni.
Thank you, Nalco. We discussed this at the last council meeting, and I want to remind all colleagues around the table, and particularly agencies who are implementing agencies who are in the room and listening, and also the Secretariat. We should not and cannot underestimate the impact of reputational risk on the operations of the GEF, on the confidence of the donor governments and the ministers that I and colleagues around the table report to, who are the lifeblood financially for the organisation, nor on the credibility of the partnership, nor on the country delivery partners in recipient countries themselves. So this is an item to which we attach a considerable degree of focus and importance. And reputational risk, of course, is somewhat in the eye of the beholder. And for that reason, I think the comments made by Elizabeth and also by Myra-Lynn are worth supporting. I think we would like to see a little more on this, in particular, the need for a specific function where the Council is informed, not the Secretariat is informed, though that is critical and important in its own right, but there's still for us not a sufficiently clear distinction between agencies' requirements to inform the Secretariat and the Secretariat promptly, or well, not promptly, but the Secretariat informing the Council, because often, you know, these are viewed through political spheres or a different perspective to perhaps the reporting entity. So it's critical that distinction is, I think, is made. We'd also like a little more clarity on what the Secretariat will do with the information that's being reported, and we too are a little underwhelmed by the maintenance of an annual reporting. We think that mechanism could be strengthened as well. So I think I'll conclude by echoing the first thing that Elizabeth said, which is we're closer, but we're not there yet. Thank you.
Thank you. May I call on Gianni, followed by Adriana.
Okay. Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We would like to thank you for your presentation, and we are supporting the amendments that were brought to the document. It would be opportune, and my constituency thinks so, as many of us have already said so, to specify that the reports to be developed by agencies to be sent to the Secretariat be underlining the way in which issues were solved in order to have compliance. And these information or this data on the way in which the non-compliance cases were managed would be lessons. They would be shared. They would be useful for all other agencies and for all stakeholders before a report be made by the end of the year with the Secretariat to the Council of GEF. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Adriana, please, followed by Lauren.
Thank you. We simply wish to emphasize that the review of cases by agencies should be immediate. However, we are somewhat concerned by the term that was changed here, where it says promptly instead of annually, because we believe that this term promptly is somewhat vague. Initially, we agreed with the word annually in paragraph 15, because we do believe that there should be some kind of time given so that reports of cases be able to be checked by the governments so the governments and focal points can check this and then also be duly looked at before they go into the GEF website. In paragraph 17, we would like you to clarify what will be the procedure to determine when a case will be published or should be published in the website without affecting the country's reputation or the agency's or GEF's reputation. Thank you.
Thank you. Lauren, please, followed by Apana.
Thank you, Chair. We support the amendment, but we would also like to support the comments made by the US on the issue of follow-up and the comments made by the Netherlands on how to provide information to the Council from the Secretariat. And finally, we had the same question as Japan. We would like to have some clarification on paragraph 15, referring to these mechanisms from that agencies have determined to be within the scope of their review. We're not very clear on what that means. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Apana, followed by Antonio.
Okay, thank you, Nalco. So I am more or less quite satisfied by these improvements in the policy. I would like to clarify to colleagues that from my experience here with the MDBs, which these mechanisms have determined to be with the scope of the review will mean that only those requests for investigation into non-compliance that have been found to be technically eligible for such investigations will be then reported and put on our website. That will address the reputation risk to either countries or the GEF agencies and indeed to GEF itself. So that I am quite agreeable to. Secondly, regarding the Secretariat reports annually, of course it should be biannually because the Council is meeting biannually, and the Secretariat makes available on the GEF website is also, I think, appropriate. Regarding the real-time reporting to Council members by GEF Secretariat, every time that you get an information, I think that is not an unreasonable request given the sensitivity of large donors as brought out by Peter's intervention. But I would like to place it and submit this for the consideration of all 32 Council members, that perhaps we should also have equal sensitivity to the operational reporting in terms of approval of projects, rejection of proposals, decision on lead agency, etc., etc. Sometimes there is a little bit of asymmetry in this sensitivity. I am equally eager to be informed as a recipient council member and as a very small donor of the operational developmental outcomes of the operational processes as much as I am to be informed promptly about cases of non-compliance or alleged non-compliance with the policy on environmental and social safeguards. So I would like this to be real-time reporting to be taken up in a more holistic manner. Thank you.
Thank you, panel. May I call on Antonio, followed by civil society.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I would like to express my appreciation to the Secretariat for this report. And I would like to make a general comment on style and then make another comment following the comments made by other members of the Council. Bearing in mind that environmental and social safeguards are important for recipient countries, that is why I would like to propose to the Secretariat that in addition to what our colleague from Argentina has proposed on reputational risk for countries, where evidence has to be shown before the report being submitted, we could ask recipient countries to also carry out self-assessment reports on environmental safeguards so as to emphasize the project's impact as well as sustainability and durability mechanisms that we have been emphasizing within the framework of this Council. It would be advisable for recipient countries to be able to do these self-assessments. And GEF could also requests from beneficiary countries, from recipient countries to report reports on environmental safeguards on the projects that have been implemented there. Thank you.
Thank you. Civil society, please, followed by Kojura.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The civil society network is appreciative of all the processes the GEF has put in place to ensure inclusivity, accountability, and transparency borne by the agencies to ensure environmental and social safeguards. Number 2 of the introduction section of the updated policy on environmental and social safeguard states that, in accordance with the purpose of the GEF and relevant provisions of the instrument, this policy sets out the GEF's approach to anticipating and then avoiding, preventing, minimizing, mitigating, managing, offsetting, or compensating any adverse impact that GEF finance projects and program may have on people or the environment throughout the project or program cycle, thereby enhancing the environmental and social outcome of such projects and programs. This statement calls for full compliance of agencies. Hence, it sets the precedence for putting in place a mechanism on informing Council of possible non-compliance with environmental and social safeguards, which is currently in review for the 56th GEF Council. This promotes inclusivity, accountability, and transparency. The GEF CSO network, having been given the opportunity to make comments on the policy, finds the following gaps and hence has made recommendations as follows. On the introductory part, number 2 of the introduction, we recommend that the statement that reads, "The proposed amendment has been prepared in consultation with the agencies," should also include the civil society as part of the group which was consulted by the Secretariat for input. And then on current GEF rules, number 5, correction, there's a typo there. At it is typed 2 times, so we just ask that they delete one. And then number 3, under number 7, we suggest that instead of the agency to report to the Secretariat about cases reported to the agency, we perceive that there might be issues of conflict of interest, and this will not promote accountability. Hence, we recommend 2 things. The first is that the independent accountability mechanism must include members of the civil society as well as the IPLCs. And then the second recommendation is that this independent accountability system so set up should be responsible for reporting cases of non-compliance and grievances to the Council through the Secretariat. And then under Annex 1, proposed amendment to the policy on environmental and social safeguards, number 17, the last phrase, we want to, in addition, that the Secretariat makes available on the GEF website the information in local languages reported by agencies in accordance with paragraph 15. Thank you very much.
Thank you. May I call on Kojura, followed by Ben?
Well, we welcome the efforts to ensure transparency about cases of non-compliance with the agency's respective policies on environmental and social risks and safeguards, and in this way reducing reputational risk to GEF. And we therefore support the change to ask agencies to report promptly to the Secretariat of cases reported to respective accountability, grievance, and conflict resolution mechanisms. However, like others, that the US, Japan, and I think Norway also mentioned this, we would like to urge to maintain a formulation regarding how the mechanisms address these cases. We think this is an important aspect. In addition, we see the need for regular updates, at least once a year, to the GEF Council on pending cases. Well, I think there's, like Aparna also mentioned, there's a question of if there should be a differentiation between really drastic cases and and lighter cases where there could be an immediate information necessary. But we would like to add some wording on this to in the end of the paragraph 16. It could be the Secretariat informs the Council in a timely manner at least once a year on the reported cases differentiated into major and minor complaints. In cases of great urgency and/or high political relevance, the Secretariat promptly informs the GEF Council.
Thank you. May I call on Ben, followed by Stefan?
Thanks, Naoko, and also thanks, Francoise, for the introduction. Like others, I think the UK welcomes the direction of travel by this proposed amendment, but we also support others in the need to go just a little bit further and finding a mechanism to ensure that the council are informed promptly, particularly where there's, and I think it's German's point here in terms of where there's non-compliance issues which could have a serious reputational impact on GEF and all of us, of course. I just wanted to raise one other issue and ask a question to the GEF Secretariat, which I think hasn't been raised by others, and that is where there's issues when a complainant hasn't approached the GEF Secretariat or one of the implementing agencies. For example, a press report or something like that the Secretariat becomes aware of on a non-compliance issue, and obviously which then have a serious reputational impact on GEF. What's the sort of possible way forward on those situations, which I think are slightly different? But thanks for the clarification.
Thank you. Stefan, you may be the last speaker of this round.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We also welcome the document and thank the Secretariat and Francoise for presenting it. We join others that while this is actually already pretty good, there's room for improvement. There were some concrete proposals made by the US, Norway, Japan, and Germany just at the end had some wording that sounded very good. Also, the point raised by, or some of the points raised by the civil society organization, including the one on making information available in the local language, but within the organizational, how do you say, number of languages that they operate in. It's all about real-time reporting, and of course, if it's a major thing, you want to be alerted earlier. If it's something that can wait for a minimum annual, or as Aparna mentioned, maybe biannual reporting that can wait for several months, that's fine too. I have a procedural question at the end. We gathered now a lot of information and proposals for amending. We will first, of course, hear the response by the Secretariat, and maybe you can then also tell us how we move forward, because I believe the recommended decision as it stands will need to be a little bit amended before we can decide on it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now I'd like to invite the Francoise to respond.
Thanks very much for this set of reactions and questions. I guess they aggregate around first queries on clarification of the intent and the language of the existing proposal, and then there's a number of points having to do with reporting mechanism, timeliness, periodicity of reporting, and then some suggestions on amendments to take us forward if that's what we decide to do. So let me try and address that. There was a query about paragraph 15, and I take it as a general query on the meaning of the amendment proposed. And to backtrack on that, I would say that the proposal is to actually link case summaries to agencies' public case registries where regular updates would be made available in a dynamic way, meaning in a continuous updated way. And as a result, the need for agencies to update the Council through the Secretariat on how cases have been addressed would become redundant, which actually means that we read paragraph 15 not as a subtraction, but rather as an addition, which is really spelled out in paragraph 17, right? They don't do anything less under this proposed policy. They do something more, which is that instead of doing it once a year, they would have to do it continuously with a dynamic link to our website. And that would, of course, include information about how cases have been addressed in the spirit of a continuous update. So that point may not be terribly clear here, and I hear the need for clarification. It is, however, the intent, and quite an addition to what we have right now. So that's the proposal, and that's the clarification. Real-life reporting. What is not changing here is, of course, that the accountability to conduct a due process on this, and one that is aligned with the minimum requirements of the safeguard policy, is one that lies with the agencies, and which, upon certification of their compliance with minimum requirements, they conduct with their own systems, right, in ways that are compliant across the board, but slightly different across agencies, right? But that responsibility lies with them, and then they have the obligation to notify us and for us to make that information available every time there is either a new case or an update to an existing case. So the presumption is that on our website, under the conflict resolution rubric, Council members would be able to access a continuous flow of updated information. That is the proposal, right? Now, just backtracking on another clarification question that was raised, what does within the scope of reviews means? It means that each agency has a due process defined by which they transform an initial complaint into an investigation if the case is warranted. Usually it involves some basic questions such as, is it really a project of this agency? Is there evidence that are affected parties that have, been subjected to an adverse impact? And is this related to the policy or in breach of the policies? So, but these questions that determine eligibility for further investigations are questions that lie within the framework, the systems, and the accountability, indeed, of agencies, which is why the formulation within the scope of review is indeed a little perhaps imprecise, because it captures the various processes that agencies have to do justice to the question. So that's the first point, which is one of clarification. Now, when it comes to reporting and to addressing the Council need for timely information and timely access for this information, what is currently proposed is that the website and the updated and continuous update is the source of that information. But I certainly hear the feedback here that there is a need and quite a consensus for a more proactive way of informing Council, which could take the form of an email notification every time an update happens. As an extreme, I would say it may lead to a few emails, but equally, the caseload that we are aware of is not very voluminous. So, it could be, as an extreme, we could have an email notification, or we could have a periodic notification, and that is entirely possible to put in place a mechanic of that type if so desired by Council. So the next question was about the reporting mechanism from Secretariat to Council, and again on this, it's entirely possible to have an annual reporting even possibly within the scope of the annual monitoring report, in which the Secretariat would give a sense of volume, status, and outcomes, again, within the limits of the information that can be shared by agencies and that has been accordingly posted, right? So that would presumably cover all the cases that have been registered by the agencies and determined to be eligible for further inquiry. We could then report back in the context of the monitoring report on an annual basis on what has happened to those cases. And that could easily be modified in that direction. There were a few more detailed questions, such as, for instance, and by the way, periodicity may, again, be a function of how Council may wish to see that happen. I'm suggesting the annual monitoring framework, because I think it belongs there in many ways. If periodicity was deemed to be more suitable, on a more frequent basis, it could be delinked, and so that's open for views. Somebody asked what happens if agencies have information which is beyond the minimum standards, and would that be reflected in the reporting onto the GEF website? If they have, and that could well be the case, information that is beyond minimum standards, presumably that also is associated with disclosure on their side, which means that on their website, they would be providing this information either earlier or more completely, or as the case might be. And since what we're proposing would be to uplift the information directly from their website into ours, presumably that information would also be provided. I would see it as desirable, as the person asking the question asked. We are not trying to get less information, we're trying to get the full extent of the information that is deemed disclosable by the agency in compliance with our minimum standards, so that would be indeed desirable. Yeah? So there was a question about the role of government and of the interaction with government on this issue. I think that fundamentally this is a question that has to be taken at the level of the agencies and not at the level of the GEF. I mean, the agencies have due processes in their contractual interactions with government as they deploy projects. They have already these policies on their books in terms of how they will address complaints, and it is not something that can be either double-guessed or modified at the level of the GEF Secretariat, right? So if they have disclosure policies on cases that are brought to them for further investigation, their systems and process will prevail in sharing information, and I think that's the best answer that I can give. Now, there was a question on what happens when there's no complaint, and yes, there might be a problem, and the problem might be, in fact, visible in the press or otherwise in the media, and therefore potentially carry reputational risk. It's a good question. It's one that is not currently covered by the policy. It's one that traditionally we have handled by, I would say, common sense, and the capacity for council to ultimately be the place where a judgment call may be exercised on what might constitute a reputational risk for the GEF partnership, right? So the practice, I guess, has been in some cases of that nature that if there is noise in the media about a case, and if it's not unsubstantiated, it will fairly quickly channel into a complaint, right? But it could also be that council takes the view that that question could be taken to the agency that is engaged in that case. And that's, again, a possibility that is not currently covered, but that might be better left to informal mechanisms, possibly, because ultimately the capacity to pass a judgment on reputational risk is one that doesn't lie with the agency doesn't lie with the GEF Secretariat, but ultimately on behalf of the GEF, we would submit lies with Council. So, having said that, we now have a proposal for an amendment on the table that would strengthen periodicity, formalize reporting, and perhaps deal with clarity if needed, although that point is one that we need to maybe further appreciate. So let me stop right here.
Thank you, Francoise. Are there any left other questions or comments? Just about this last case, I think normally that what we will do is that to actually let the agency know about it, and then that at least then they can start the processing. I think that's a practice that we are doing. But with that, if there are Peter? Okay.
Thank you, Naoko, and thank you, Francoise, for very considered responses to the questions. It's not my habit to come in on a second time, but I was struck by a couple of things that were said, which tie with a sort of second tier of points that safeguards experts in my capital have provided me with, which guide the application of the Australian aid programme, and I think there's some relevance here. I absolutely want to endorse Ben's point that we cannot rely on these sorts of issues coming to our attention solely through the grievance mechanisms of our implementing agencies. Those issues may come through other means, where, for instance, and this is just some examples or that we maybe need to think through, where an agency, for instance, becomes aware of non-compliance through or an emerging or unanticipated risk of serious harm to people or the environment that results from activity, or an environmental notice being served on an agency or its contractors, such as a notice of non-compliance or a demand for rectification from a government authority. Those would not necessarily come through grievance mechanisms. Then there is the whole raising of issues outside of the agencies. So I understand, I think, Francoise, how you explained paragraph 15, and I'm pretty comfortable with it in the context of that explanation. It's what sits outside paragraph 15, really, on this point. I was also quite struck by Cordula's formulation and the recognition that not all issues are equivalent, and people will complain about any number of things. So I think in thinking about how we apply this and the mechanism, when we're looking at perhaps the unintended death of a contracted worker, it's a very different order of an issue from perhaps some land movement that's resulted in the cracking of the foundations of a small dwelling. So we're not expecting nor anticipating that agencies will be reporting every single one of these to the same degree at the same time frame. So maybe there is, I think, utility in trying to develop some sort of scaling model that will help guide agencies, but will also help guide, I think, the Secretariat themselves, yourselves, on taking the initiative to inform Council when something of that serious nature bubbles up. And I agree, we're driven by common sense on that. But given that we've opened the door on this in the policy and the amendment, I think it would benefit from a little more expansion to just separate out some of these points and give the Council a little more confidence that agencies are clear on what's expected of them, the role of the grievance mechanisms, but also the needs of the Council to be informed outside of that framework. Thank you.
Oh, there's another comment on
All right, may I just call on Julian?
Thank you. And I've listened very carefully to what has been said. I think it's very important to ensure that the reputational risks are managed. The issue of matters being raised outside of agencies that may come to the attention of the council from various sources there has to be a process for verification, and there has to be a process for consultation with those stakeholders who may be so implied in these things. It's very, very sensitive issue. I think it has to be managed very carefully. There is a process for complaints through agencies, and that can be observed. But where things come to the attention of the council outside of these processes, then those matters have to be managed very carefully, because then we speak to, in a very serious way, reputational risks. I think there has to be a process for consultation with the key stakeholders at the local level who respond to the GEF and to respond to the agencies. And I think one of the key agents must be the operational focal point or the political focal point. So there must be a process clearly set out where matters which arise outside of the structure that comes to the attention of the Secretariat and that will be brought to the attention of the Council, first must be at least the local agent must be so aware, and there must be an opportunity for verification and for provision of additional information if necessary to clarify any matter. So I think it has to be very careful how these matters which come outside of the structure are dealt with. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gillian. I'd like to ask Francois to respond.
Thank you very much for both follow-ups. I mean, this is a point that has been discussed quite at length in the preparation leading to the drafting of this document, and also one that along the way, as we consulted with agencies on this, was brought up from several directions. And I think the point is actually nicely summarized by the Jamaica contribution, which is that there is a need for a due process to transform noise into something worthy of notification or further inquiry, if you will. And as the roles and responsibility lie right now across the partnership, that due process cannot happen at the level of the Secretariat, which means that in the best of all cases, alerted by council judgment or council members' judgment about perceived reputational risks attached to the GEF, the next step has to be one of triggering examination by the agency potentially concerned. Now, we have also our own mechanism under the form of the conflict resolution officer, which is an other entry point, but also an entry point that essentially needs, is followed by transfer of the issue to the agency for further due diligence, right? So in that sense, we cannot, and that point was amply discussed, we cannot be, or we are not equipped, neither by system skills or mandate at this point, to actually conduct a validation of that information which come from an outside source. We are, of course, committed to alerting the respective agency to the need to do exactly that, but that's how currently it is set up in the partnership. So that's, I mean, it would require much more considerable change to take it beyond that at this point. Yeah?
Thank you, Francois. I hope this satisfies the question. I understand this is a very difficult question. We have had quite an internal discussion about what we could do. But the point is that, as raised by several developing countries, there are very sensitive issues that somebody really needs to validate it. And then otherwise we create another reputational risk. So that at this point of time that our partnership setup has this validation mechanism at the agency level, and we just need to rely on that. That was really the point. And so with that, I would like to seek that the approval of a proposed decision. Yeah, with amendment, yeah.
What's the amendment?
Yeah, we will actually submit an amendment. There is a slight the clarification to be made, so that with that we will circulate it actually that later this afternoon together with another 3 homework. Now it's going to be 4th homework, but there is a session to be to handle it. This is basically a proposal by Germany. That is that right?
Just to make sure we understood it right, we are going to get a written version of what we are going to decide about, and then we are going to decide.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm not taking that decision now, but we will table that. The consensus is that yes, I think we come up the solution or the agreement, but we will just make sure that I table it, and you will adopt it in the afternoon session. So that will be the right way of doing that. So with that, we will break for lunch, and I think that there is an important lunch and for actually the CEO hosted lunch, and we will come back at 2:30, and there is another important item left over from from morning, so I really would like you to come back on time. France, please.
Yes, thank you. Just, to remind you that we have this MOPAN presentation for the lunch, and all members, I think, and alternate council members are invited to join, so please